U.S. protests over death of a man in police custody intensify across several cities. South Africa eases its lockdown to level 3 from the 1st of June. And on World No Tobacco Day, we examine the risks COVID-19 poses to smokers and tobacco farmers in Zimbabwe. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to you live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers. Here are more stories making headlines this hour. United States adds several Chinese firms to a trade blacklist as tensions escalate. And in your sport news, the Football Kenya Federation's decision to cancel the 2019-2020 league season challenged in court. Curfews ignored as protests rage on throughout major cities in the United States nearly a week after a black man died in police custody in Minneapolis. Standoffs between protesters and police, and now the National Guard recently deployed to help regional law enforcement. In Seattle, police are using flash bombs to disperse demonstrators. Minneapolis police are using tear gas and rubber bullets to deter rioters. The full Minnesota National Guard activated for the first time since World War II. Here's Minnesota Governor Tim Walz.
We simply ask for cooperation to help us reestablish order on our streets, to make it clear that the force that has been put on the ground is there for the long haul, that this is not a place where violence is any way going to step on or dilute the message that we've got work to do around racial injustices. We've got work to do to bring justice for George.
Los Angeles police said they made numerous arrests on Saturday evening amid continuous looting. Media showed footage of police stopping cars and forcing people to lie flat on the ground before making arrests. It was unclear the detentions were connected to the nearby looting of several shops. In Salt Lake City, there was a standoff between police and protesters. And in several states, the District of Columbia is asking for help from the National Guard to restore order. CDTN's Zhang Dan has the details.
From Minneapolis to at least 30 cities, including Los Angeles, Denver, Atlanta, Detroit, and Louisville, protesters are flaring throughout the U.S., prompting over 25 cities and 16 states to impose curfews. All for a black man who died as a white police officer knelt on his neck.
Man, I can't breathe in my face. Just get up.
What do you want?
I can't breathe.
Over in Minneapolis, where everything started, the situation turns into raging violence when night falls, as protesters defy the curfew.
I'm tired of my black men and my black women being shot, being killed by the NYPD. I'm tired of it. I have 3 black men in my home. I'm tired. I am tired.
Protesters staged another round on Saturday in at least a dozen major U.S. cities coast to coast, including just outside the White House. At least 8 states and the District of Columbia have either activated or requested the National Guard. The Minnesota National Guard says they have more than 4,000 citizen soldiers and airmen responding to protests, and over 10,000 Guard troops are expected to join the response. Zhang Dan, CGTN.
Meanwhile, President Donald Trump has returned to the White House after a visit to Florida to witness the SpaceX rocket launch. He says he will not tolerate mob violence during the demonstrations.
We cannot and must not allow a small group of criminals and vandals to wreck our cities and lay waste to our communities. We must defend the rights of every citizen to live without violence, prejudice, or fear. My administration will stop mob violence, and will stop it cold.
Protesters assembled in New York for a 3rd straight day, expressing their anger over the death of George Floyd and asking for harsher charges.
They're trying to make the story the reaction to murder rather than murder. The fact is that the reaction to murder would not have happened had there been no murder.
That's right.
Do not get it twisted. When we got to Minneapolis, they asked us if we came to denounce violence. Yes, the violence started when a man put his knee on the neck.
Yeah, that's right, that's right.
and held him down for over 8 minutes. That's the violence that needs to be dealt with.
George Floyd's death has raised a memory of another unarmed black man. In 2014, Eric Garner was arrested on suspicion of selling loose, untaxed cigarettes. He died when a New York City police officer put him in a banned chokehold. Both Garner and Floyd had said, "I can't breathe." Garner's mother appeared with Sharpton calling for justice for Floyd.
We're not just going to sit still while they kill our people. They come into our neighborhoods. They brutalize, they terrorize, they murder us. And then it gets swept under the rug.
Right, that's right.
No more sweeping under the rug.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Let's turn now to other news. Africa continues to fight against the spread of COVID-19. Let's take a look at the figures. The continent has recorded over 141,000 cases with around 59,200 recoveries confirmed. The death toll stands at just over 4,000. In East Africa, Kenya has reported nearly 2,000 cases. The country has enforced a partial lockdown in the capital, Nairobi, and the coastal town of Mombasa. Meanwhile, Mauritius has announced the lifting of its coronavirus lockdown measures. Restaurants, cafes, and markets will reopen. However, the island's famous beaches will remain closed. In northern Africa, Egypt continues to record the highest number of cases in the region. The country introduced new measures on Saturday to curb the spread of the virus. Let's turn to South Africa, which has enforced some of the strictest lockdown measures on the continent. The country has announced a nationwide lockdown will move to level 3. Here's what exactly that means for South Africans. Public gatherings are still banned. An exception has been made for those going to work, seeking medical care, and attending funerals. Borders will remain closed. Domestic travel will only be allowed for business purposes. Restaurants will be allowed to open for delivery services. The ban on alcohol will be removed. Businesses with a liquor license will be able to sell alcohol from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. between Monday and Thursday. Places of worship will also be allowed to reopen. They will be allowed to operate under restriction to curb the spread of COVID-19. On Sunday, the country will hold a national day of prayer. Schools will also be allowed to reopen on an optional basis. School will resume on Monday for those in grades 7 and 12. Students will be required to wear face masks, sanitize, and maintain social distancing measures. Well, let's now go to Angela Coppola, who's in Johannesburg for us. Thank you so much for joining us, Angelo. Tell us more about the National Day of Prayer today and also the easing of restrictions starting Monday.
Well, look, I mean, when the President, Cyril Ramaphosa, made the announcement that he was calling for a National Day of Prayer, he reminded everybody that the churches were still going to be closed today. That's the 31st. That's the day before we move into level 3 lockdown. So he appealed to everybody to pray at home, to stay out of big groups, and to adhere to that social distancing. So everybody is doing that day of prayer in their own way, across all denominations, from Muslim through to Catholic, through to the Jesuits. Everybody is doing it that way, and they're staying out of the churches. Those churches do open on Monday. In terms of the restrictions that have been lifted and eased, we spoke about the churches. They're going to be open, but what's interesting there is most of the major organizations have said that they actually won't be opening the doors for congregants from the 1st because they think it's too early. In fact, the Muslim committee said that they wouldn't be opening their churches in the Western Cape for at least another month. Of course, you know that the Western Cape is one of the most serious hotspots in the country. And those hotspots that have been identified by the health minister also cover the other major metropolitan areas. So it's very unlikely that churches, like for example, the Methodist Church have said, if you're in a hotspot,
Is that there have been some good results from patients who are COVID-19 positive and use chloroquine. However, for you to be able to scientifically prove that it actually works, there are some levels of clinical trials that you have to pass through.
But the drug isn't the only option Nigeria is open to. The Food and Drug Administration and Control says the country is exploring other homegrown remedies, but it's doing this with caution and adhering to necessary protocols.
We neglected herbal medicine research for years, for decades. We are secretive as a culture. My own parents or grandparents died with their knowledge, have a lot of good herbal plants, but we've neglected it. We have what it takes in this country. Not for COVID necessarily, but including COVID. We don't know yet whether something can work for COVID. It has to be tested. It has to be researched into. So that is what we are encouraging our researchers and practitioners to submit to us what they think may work.
I think it's a welcome development, except that Nigerians should not be gullible enough that think that the fact that we've started this, then it means that it will certainly work. Thousands and one investigation or tests or clinical trials are going on different formulations, which may also include herbal mixture. So,
about 4 research projects have so far been submitted for further analysis and testing. Nigeria has also procured Madagascar's herbal mixture for COVID-19, following claims that several patients recovered after being treated with the remedy. Authorities reveal that the plant used in Madagascar's remedy also grows in Nigeria. And like Madagascar, Nigeria wants to look within for its own solution. Kelechi Emekalam, CGT and Abuja, Nigeria.
Well, it's time now for us to take a short break and return. More news making headlines, including Somalia launches investigations into the death of 7 aid workers in the country. And on World No Tobacco Day, we examine the risk COVID-19 poses to smokers and farmers in Zimbabwe.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. Sudan has summoned the Ethiopian embassy's charge d'affaires over a border attack by suspected Ethiopian rebel fighters. According to Khartoum, several Sudanese army personnel and civilians were killed and wounded. Sudan News Agency reports that the attack targeted a camp in the eastern city of Gadaref. Sudan's army spokesperson, General Amir Mohammed Al-Hassan, has urged Ethiopia to abide by its agreements with Sudan on their mutual boundaries, along with deployments of official forces on either side of the border. Sudan and Ethiopia have been engaged in continuous talks over the demarcation of the borders between the two countries. At least 15 people have died in northern Burkina Faso following an attack on a convoy transporting traders. Several others were wounded during the incident. Official reports indicate that many more remain unaccounted for. The strike took place in the province of Laroum at around 5 p.m. local time. At least 4 women were among the dead. 2 lorries were burnt. In the commotion, the country has been battling armed combatants with links to terrorist groups since 2017. On Thursday, the armed forces reported that they had destroyed a militant camp in another province, still in the north. 10 assailants and 1 soldier died during the operation. On to Somalia now, where authorities there are trying to piece together information after 8 people, including health workers, were executed near Mogadishu. CDTN's Abdulaziz Bello brings us the details.
The killings took place north of Mogadishu. Locals say masked men in military uniform abducted 8 people, among them 7 health workers, before killing them. The 7 were working for the Zemzem Foundation, a local non-governmental organization. Golole is an agricultural town on the outskirts of Balad, some 30 kilometers north of Mogadishu.
I have been living there for the past 60 years. Those killed were our children. We took them to university and brought them back to support the community. They were ambushed and killed by men in military uniform. Our children are not Al-Shabaab.
I lost my son. I also lost his colleagues who treated me as their uncle and grandfather. We are innocent civilians who practice farming for survival. Whatever happened here in our village is beyond imagination. Nothing of this sort has ever happened in all my years of existence.
The government has condemned the attack, despite locals linking the murder to members of the Somali army. Lawmakers hailing from the region have called for a swift investigation into the mass murder.
The killings will not go unsolved. We will ensure proper investigation is done, and those found responsible must face the law. The young people were killed in a horrible way. It's a sad day for us all.
Abductions and targeting of humanitarian and medical workers is a common thing in Somalia. Militant group Al-Shabaab has in the past been labeled as the biggest culprit, as it seeks funds to sustain its operations. 3 days prior to the attack, several government soldiers were killed in Golole village in a deadly roadside blast. Community leaders have suggested that the attack might have been an act of revenge following the deaths of the soldiers. Militant group Al-Shabaab has lost control of towns and villages across much of the country, but the group continues to inflict heavy losses on government troops. Meanwhile, as investigations begin, there are concerns that the latest execution of health workers will deal a huge blow to government's efforts of combating terrorism. Abdulaziz Bello, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
A boat carrying 101 migrants attempting to travel to Europe has been intercepted on the Libyan coast city of Garabuli. The migrants were immediately taken to a security checkpoint in Qom City, some 120 kilometers east of Tripoli. The Government of National Accords Interior Ministry says the migrants will later on be transported to a detention center. Since the fall of Muammar Gaddafi's regime in 2011, Libya's western coast has become a main departure point for migrants bound to Europe fleeing war and poverty. Many migrants are still attempting the crossing of the Mediterranean Sea despite the closure of Libya's international border due to the coronavirus pandemic. Last week, Libya's Coast Guard stopped nearly 400 migrants attempting to cross the Mediterranean. COVID-19 has added fresh impetus to a global campaign to ban tobacco, as some experts believe damage caused by fumes from cigarettes increase the chances of succumbing to the virus. CGTN's Farai Mokatuya examines the risk of COVID-19 to smokers and farmers who depend on tobacco for their livelihoods.
Smokers have long been cautioned about the hazards of their habit. Now the deadly pandemic has amplified the warnings.
So normally, if you have smoked for a long time, anything more than 5 to 10 years, your lungs are beginning to get damaged. And knowing that COVID-19 is a respiratory illness sort of compounds the potential for severe disease in smokers. So if a smoker with emphysema gets COVID-19, they are going to probably need ICU, probably need ventilation, and they'll probably recover slower than somebody with healthy lungs.
But some smokers aren't ready to quit.
Everyone is at risk of contracting COVID-19 because at some point they will remove their masks and come into contact with other people. For example, when they're going to buy food. I know many people who started smoking in their youth and died at old age from other causes. There are so many other things that can kill you. It's not only tobacco.
The pandemic has caused complications for those who rely on earnings from the golden leaf.
The sales floor were meant to open in February, but only opened towards May. That brought our operations to a standstill because we did not have money to pay our workers.
It was a very big gap of share.
Seed beds for 30 hectares of new crop were meant to be made up by now, but are still work in progress. Land preparation has also lagged.
Next season is already 3 months behind.
That could have a bearing on the quantity and quality of next year's crop, which may lower returns for farmers already facing additional expenses.
We don't have thermometers, masks and sanitizers, and we don't have the money to buy them until we make our first sales. Right now, we are putting ourselves and our workers at high risk.
And that will put further scrutiny on operations that are under intense pressure to be stopped. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Guinea is among the most COVID-19 hit countries in West Africa. The situation there is worrying and has prompted youth in the country to create innovative solutions that they believe will help put an end to the pandemic. CGTN's Jane Keogh has that story.
Osman Sware from Conakry in Guinea is trying to come up with solutions to help battle COVID-19 in his country. He's invented a smart disinfectant, a walk-in disinfecting tunnel, as well as a multilingual tablet. The tablet captures any movement and then triggers the spraying system. The device is designed to disinfect 187 people per hour.
Once you get inside, the tunnel detects the presence of a person and starts spraying the system with a disinfectant. The design was done here in Guinea and all the equipment was found on site in Conakry.
Technology has immensely come to the world's rescue during this crucial time. A group of young innovators from this startup company have also invented an artificial respirator. It's locally made of recycled material.
We have the ability to increase and decrease the frequency of oxygen according to the patient's state of health. Depending on the diagnosis and the doctor's recommendations, we adjust the ventilator from a smartphone or a computer. When this is done, there's no risk that the patient will be overloaded or slightly discharged of oxygen. Everything is done with the utmost care.
Following the COVID-related deaths and infections, Guinean authorities have welcomed these innovations.
We're going to introduce electronic identification of contacts into surveillance, as has been done in Korea and some Asian countries. Already we have the agreement of a partner who will make this software available to us. We therefore intend to use all the software that can help us correct current shortcomings in data management and in the identification and tracking of contacts.
President Alpha Conde has extended the state of emergency placed in Conakry, Koya and Dubreka cities until the 15th of June. The government hopes that these technological innovations will somehow help in putting an end to COVID-19 in the country. Jane Keogh, CGTN.
Your business news after the break. Here's what's coming up. The United States adds several Chinese firms to a trade blacklist as tensions escalate. And the Egyptian Stock Exchange to switch back to normal operating hours.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in. Business in Africa is high risk. After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Ucheo Koronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Time now for us to turn our attention to the world of business and yet another move which is likely to further deteriorate relations between Beijing and Washington. The U.S. Department of Commerce has added 33 firms that it claims are Chinese to a trade blacklist. Brian Dormans tells us more.
The U.S. Department of Commerce says the expanded blacklist is intended to restrict technology access by Chinese companies. In a vague and sweeping tweet, Secretary Wilbur Ross said the additions were aimed at preventing activities that undermine U.S. interests. Among the companies listed is a Japanese-funded AI and robotics firm, CloudMinds. That company incorporated in the Cayman Islands and had already closed its Silicon Valley office over lack of investment funds back in January. Businesses and officials in China have criticized the move. In a statement, Quio 360, a software company on the new list, called its listing unfair and added it had recently revealed evidence of a decade-long cyber attack led by U.S. intelligence agencies on China. Speaking to Bloomberg News, Li Yong, a senior fellow at the China Association of International Trade, said the U.S. was trying to send a message to China and that the intention was to politicize commercial ties and curb China's technology development. Brian Dorman, CGTN.
Well, for an analysis of these developments, we talked to current affairs commentator Einar Tangen.
Right now, I think people should be preparing for a post-Trump world. The fact is that he is not doing well. You can see it in the kind of frenzied tweeting that he's doing. Doesn't seem to make sense. It's one step forward, two steps back type of thing. At this point, he feels he has no choice, but China does. I think strategic patience at this point, waiting to look and see what happens in November, is probably the wiser thing. Responding to him at this point is just playing his game. And so in terms of decoupling, yes, companies are planning. But interestingly, even American companies are not leaving China. Simply what they're doing is they're keeping their production facilities in place and developing other production facilities in other third countries, which would allow them to deal with both the U.S. and China. So it's added cost that's going to go into consumer pockets, but it's not necessarily going to change the world. Trade will go on. China will still be the largest stable market in the world. And if you're not in China, it's doubtful that you have a growth plan.
Let's bring our attention back to the continent, where Nigeria's central bank on Thursday slashed its benchmark lending rate to 12.5% from 13.5%. This is the first time it has done so since March 2019 and the largest drop recorded since 2015. The cut aims to increase lending in an economy that faces imminent recession due to the pandemic. But some experts are arguing that it would take more than a cut in the monetary policy rate to get the economy firing again. Here's CGTN's Deji Badmos with more.
The decision by the central bank to cut the benchmark interest rate took quite a number of close watchers of the economy by surprise, and it has divided opinion among the experts, with the main argument centering on the monetary lending rate and the cash reserve ratio, which the MPC retained at 27.5%.
Even though cash reserve requirement, the rates could have been adjusted, but the one that is mostly efficient is the adjustment of monetary policy rate.
I don't think the monetary policy rate is a major determinant of lending rate in the market today. So in that wise, I wouldn't think adjusting the monetary policy rate will have any material impact on the lending rate or the available credit in the market.
It remains to be seen whether the decision to lower the benchmark interest rate would spur more lending in the banking sector and generate economic growth, which is what the central bank is targeting. While the Nigerian government and the IMF have projected the country would slide back into recession this year, the Apex Bank is bullish that could be avoided. It's a position that is also dividing opinion.
I think it's inevitable. Nigeria will go into a recession because when you look at our export, our current account is negative. When you look at our export as completely reduced, when you look at our import also significantly reduced, exchange rate, foreign reserve has contrasted.
Nigeria can actually sidestep an economic recession, and I'll tell you why. Because for you to have a recession, you must have 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. We are likely going to have a negative growth in the second quarter of this year. But the third quarter, which will be the period July to September, may not have a negative growth.
But even if Nigeria avoids slipping into recession by the end of the year, there are fears the country may not be able to avoid a second devaluation, especially if oil prices continue to remain low.
The reasons why I don't think the central bank will have a compelling need to devalue the currency is because we are seeing recoveries in oil prices. We're also seeing rebalancing in crude oil market.
Devaluation may not necessarily happen if before the end of June, oil price climb up to $40 a barrel. But if it does not, then it will become inevitable.
There's no certainty about the Nigerian economy at the moment, and this is likely the result of low oil prices in the global market. The country's oil monopoly, NNPC, recently disclosed that it is still looking for buyers for its crude oil, whose demand has dropped due to the coronavirus pandemic. But with more and more countries easing their lockdowns, there's hope demand for oil will rise. How quickly that happens could make the big difference for Africa's largest economy. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos.
The Egyptian exchange is switching back to operating hours due to its listed normal trading hours from Sunday. For the past month, the stock exchange had reduced its operating time by an hour. The latest step comes as the country gradually reopens its economy. CGTN's Adel Amarochi has more.
The Egyptian stock market will, from this week, operate normally. Trading in all indexes will take place daily from 10 in the morning until 2:30 in the evening, instead of ending operations at 1:30 p.m. due to the anti-COVID-19 restrictions. Egypt is decreasing its curfew time by 3 hours, taking the first step in its COVID-19 coexisting program.
The
bourse interacts with surrounding economic developments. It's also an indication that the bourse has confidence to open up all restrictions over trading. In the past period, foreign investors have been exiting the stock market, which has seen a revival in local trading. The month of May has a kind of uptrend, and we were among very few markets in the world witnessing that.
During the past month, EGX 30 has only gained 300 points. It's not much, but at least Egypt's prime stock market indicator has stopped its COVID-19 freefall. Supported by the government's decision to gradually open up the economy this week, experts are projecting a good trading week.
Quarter one results have seen some blue chips exceeding last year's quarter one growth, but overall companies have seen profit losses from 7 to 20%, which are not dramatic changes. Our main target now is not getting an uptrend in indexes. We want to maintain trading activity, high financial liquidity in order to diminish the market existing amongst foreigners. We need a dynamic market where investors easily enter and exit without concerns. All of this should see a good recovery with the opening up policy.
The year has begun with EGX 30 opening at 13,960 points. Panic caused by the COVID-19 pandemic has seen it plummet to 8,750 points in March. Banks too are increasing their operation hours this week. They will be open for the public daily until 3 o'clock instead of 1:30 p.m., which is still 2 hours short than their pre-COVID-19 working hours. Overall, the Egyptian financial market is getting some good news for the first time in over 2 months. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
South Africa is seeking investments from multilateral lenders, commercial banks, and pension funds for an infrastructure program that will cost more than $20 billion. The project will focus on network industries such as rail and ports, energy, broadband connectivity, water, sanitation, and human settlements. CGTN's Angela Coppola brings us more on that story.
The aim is to develop an infrastructure-led growth recovery plan that will stimulate economic activity and job creation. But the COVID-19 pandemic has changed the investment landscape, and that's occupying the minds of program organizers and advisors.
What we've seen as a consequence of COVID-19 has been a very parochial, inward-looking, introspective approach by most countries. And I personally am skeptical that we're going to see the same level of cross-border capital flowing as we have done historically in a more stable global economic and political environment.
The development of the renewable energy sector is a prime example of what can be achieved.
We should do nothing to undermine that track record. In fact, we should be taking it and we should be applying it to many other infrastructure projects, whether it's road, whether it's rail, whether it's ports, whether it's telecommunications, whether it's water.
But there are uncertainties around the regulatory environment which have been a hurdle to getting capital commitments.
We can't have uncertainties as to the sanctity of contract. We need to ensure that we've got absolutely reliable cast iron terms and conditions, as I've said, and appropriate levels of return, which reflect the risk that is being borne by the various parties associated with the project. If we don't address what have been very significant constraints in terms of regulation, or we ensure that there are appropriate levels of return, terms and conditions that are available to investors. And by investors, I include lenders, any providers of capital. And then we're not going to mobilize the capital that's required. And some of those issues have been outstanding for a long time.
For South Africa to get those investors involved in those bankable projects, it's going to have to do things slightly differently.
It's not as though government is not aware of this. The issue is getting internal alignment, not only across government, but also in particular within state-owned organizations that are critical counterparties to such projects. And unless and until we do that, we're not going to be able to achieve our potential in terms of not only the projects, but the speed within which they are implemented.
I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Time for us to take a short break. Here's what's coming up when we return. Lagos City in Nigeria to adopt strategy of home care treatment for mild COVID-19 cases.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival, and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Lagos, which is the epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic in Nigeria, is facing a new challenge. It is running out of bed space for patients of the disease. The government of the city now says it would adopt a strategy of home care treatment for mild cases. But experts are warning that could be dangerous. CGTN's Deji Badmos has that report.
It's something many saw coming. Even the Lagos state government had always known its COVID-19 cases could explode beyond the capacity of its healthcare infrastructure. And that's exactly what is playing out at the moment. On the average, the city now records 100 cases of COVID-19 every day. The government has been opening new isolation centers, but the infection rate is outpacing the construction of the centers.
As we open new isolation facilities, they start to fill up relatively quickly. and we're running at about between 60 and 70% bed occupancy now.
Part of the reasons why there's still some bed space left in the isolation centers is because patients are getting discharged. But there's one other worrying reason.
As we diagnose and we try to evacuate the patients to the isolation centers, we're finding it difficult finding some patients. And the trend is increasing.
Authorities say the runaway patients are choosing to isolate themselves in different places. And it's partly for that reason and the overstressed isolation centers that it is now adopting a home care management of patients with mild to moderate cases.
The concept of home isolation is being practiced by many Nigerians, even though it is not yet a state or a national policy. But the people of Lagos are practicing home isolation, which is one of the reasons why we as government are trying to transition to home care, home-based, because it's happening anyway.
But medical experts in the city are divided over the issue of home care management.
The number of persons coming into the isolation centers is higher than the number of persons that are exiting from the isolation centers. And I'm sure this has prompted the need to reconsider the treatment pattern, especially for asymptomatic cases. So I totally am in line with the propositions of the Lagos State government.
In the slum, you have people that are staying like 5, 6, 10, 20 in a room. No sanitary condition, no hygiene, no sanitation, no water supply. And then now you are transferring these people to such community and such house for home management. They have to stay in a room. They have to be alone inside that room. They have to use a different toilet. They have to use different utensils. Who's going to take charge of them?
The Lagos State government says managing a single patient in an isolation center is costing around $130. The government is also projecting the number of cases in the city could hit around 120,000 by July. So the home care management policy might just be a difficult proposal to ignore. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos.
Well, our sport news is coming up after the break. Here's a highlight. Football Kenya Federation's decision to cancel the 2019-2020 league season challenged in court.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Time now for your sport news. We cross to Kenya, where the decision by the country's football federation to cancel the 2019-2020 season due to COVID-19 has been challenged in court. This is the latest dispute between Football Kenya Federation and the Kenyan Premier League Limited, the company that manages the domestic top-flight league. Here's CGTN's Muhammad Abubakar with more.
Since the suspension of the Kenyan Premier League in March, players from majority of the 18 clubs have been under financial strain. However, Tusker FC, one of the few professionally run teams in the country, has ensured that all staff are taken care of.
In terms of their welfare, I think Tusker is one of the teams that have kept all the players on their payrolls, and everyone is receiving their salaries as they've been doing previously. All the players are on medical cover. I'm talking about the players at the technical bench as well.
The 2016 champions were on the hunt for a 12th domestic title and trailing leaders Gor Mahia by 8 points with a game in hand before the league was suspended. With uncertainty hanging over the decision to cancel the season, Tusker is using social media to monitor its players' fitness.
We monitor the progress of what they're doing at home via WhatsApp, whereby periodically everyone is sending a video of what they're doing at home, just to give us some, some comfort that they're doing something. But besides that, we have a program that is being run on the kind of exercises that they need to be engaged in on a daily basis.
As the court case challenging the decision to end the 2019-20 season continues, the Tusker boss is questioning the possibility of a restart with the rise in COVID-19 infections in Kenya.
Still struggling with how practical it will be to restart the league, given the time that we have now, because you need about 6 weeks of pre-season to enable us to be able to be ready for the league, the next season that was scheduled to begin in August. But if the new seasons, the commencement of the new season is going to be pushed backwards, then probably we can still talk about there's a possibility of completing the rounds, the 3 rounds of games that was still remaining or pending.
With football resuming in other parts of Africa and Europe, the fate of the Kenyan Premier League is now a matter of wait and see. Mohamed Abubakar, CGTN.
World Marathon record holder Eliud Kipchoge, alongside other East African distance running stars, Kenenisa Global Sports Communications, and is open to all who register in the NN Running Team website. It will feature teams of 4 individuals, each running for 10.5 kilometers to complete a full marathon. Single entries will be paired with athletes from all over the world to form a team where some will involve NNN running stars. The marathon has been scheduled to take place between the 6th and the 7th of June. Bayern